Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a good day out there. This should be Wednesday. All right. Okay. So, this is the sectionalism notes. The first portion of this video will be just me talking about how I want you to do your notes. The second portion of this video will be me going through the actual slides. And yeah, if there's any slides you need more time on, obviously pause. But make sure you listen to everything I say because, why not? That's why you're here, is to listen to me, hopefully. We're going to do notes a very specific way. So you're going to need one piece of paper, or maybe two if you don't like writing on the back, or maybe three if you write big and you make it neat. That's okay. You're going to make some form of a T-chart. That's really the most important thing. All right. So on the front of your paper, obviously, you should probably put your name somewhere in here. That would be good. But besides that, and putting your name on there, at the top, we're going to define sectionalism again. So you just need to put sectionalism. We'll do that later when we do the actual notes. Okay? But it's a big T chart with north and south. I put them in caps so I wouldn't forget the south, the north. But it's technically actually three columns, right? Because I'm going to have my topics over at the side. All right? So I'm going to go through each of these different topics. I'm actually going to go through all of them for the north and then all of them for the south, just because that's how my PowerPoint's set up. So keep that in mind. But we're going to make our notes now so that we can save some time on the back end. So the first thing, views on slavery. So make sure you make a big T chart. You're supposed to be following along with me right now as you do this. I had to try about 4 times to make it this neat, which is why I'm not doing it live with you. But yeah, happy little T charts, right? Bob Ross, get it? So anyway, views on slavery, right? You should have one for north and south, and then you should draw another line across for the next section. Now, full disclosure, you might want to actually give more room for the economy than I did because it's 2 slides per thing. It's part 1 and part 2. So there's might be a lot, and I expect you to be summarizing here, but there might be a lot that you want to write down for that. So economy is the next category, right? This is the North's area. This is the South's area. After that is tariffs. And this, I did not do a good design here, but I'm sorry. So this is tariffs, right? And then North, South. Then we just flip over to the back. On the back, right? Reminded myself the North, the South. I have tariffs here, continued, because I figured I would need more space. Next category is immigration and urbanization. We're going to talk about the difference between North and South with that. Religious and moral. It's like religious and moral views or something. I just abbreviated it. Religion and morals, and then representation and population. Okay, so this is a big T chart. It might end up being about 3 pages rather than 2. I would err on that side if I were you. I'm sorry that my sample isn't perfect, but what that lets you do is just make sure that you write everything that you need to and that you feel comfortable with. And this way, when I ask you on that study guide to compare and contrast the North and the South in general terms, you are really good to do that. You already know how, right? Because we already have notes that do that in all of our different categories. And yeah, congratulations on making it this far in the video. And hopefully I'll put in a cool edit here. Oh, hey, third time filming this intro. Cheers. Welcome. I say welcome like you weren't just in this video, but I'm working on editing, so this is big for me. Okay, well anyway, that's hot. Let's talk sectionalism. Why not? Why not talk sectionalism? Let me get my timer down. This should only take a few minutes, a few more of your minutes anyway. So remember, you should have your notes. They should look like this. I know I'm small on the screen. And let's dive right in. So definition, and this is maybe a few words different than the definition that we had before, but it's basically the same. Citizens putting the interests of their own region or section of the country over the interests of the country as a whole. And so if you are a person who likes the states' rights argument, if you are a person, and there were people like that among our founding fathers in everyone's sense, who likes the local control over many of the issues, and that is in our 10th Amendment, that states' rights do exist, whatever that means. If you like that, then sectionalism doesn't have to be a bad thing. Now, where we have an issue with it is going to be that we all have to send people to the federal governments and still make some laws for everybody. And it depends what those laws are going to be over whether it's going to be really contentious, if it's going to be an issue. Slavery is going to be the issue that compromise after compromise kind of can hold back the floodgates, but we're going to stop compromising eventually. And slavery is going to be the thing that we can't really do a whole lot to stop something like the Civil War from happening. And that's where sectionalism is bad. So it doesn't have to be a good or a bad thing, depending on the type of system you want our country to have and the amount of power you want states or regions to have. But with how things were going in the 1800s with slavery, especially its expansion, which we'll talk about with the trigger events, it's a big issue that we have many people, even in our own federal government, who identify as Southerners or Northerners rather than, or Westerners, but rather than identifying as Americans. Okay. So the North, we're going to talk about the North first. So this should be one column. We're going straight down on one column of your notes, and then we'll tackle the South later on. I'm going to split this into 3 different parts. If you need more time to write anything down, just pause the video, right? But remember, try and summarize. I talk forever anyway. Please listen to me. Please listen to me. Today, we're going to look at the North first, and then the South will be tomorrow and the next day. This will take 3 days now because I don't want your whole day to just be listening to me. So, big changes are happening. We've talked about this some on the doodle notes already. But basically, in the North, as with anywhere in America, most people are some version of family farmer. But in the North, the change is coming a lot faster than in the South. There's growing urbanization. So more people live in cities, big cities sometimes, and other times it's like factory towns or just bigger towns than what you find in the South, which is incredibly rural. Really, more people having jobs attached to them that aren't farmer is a big part of what we're talking about here. So factories, the Industrial Revolution, increased immigration. Okay, abolitionists speaking their mind out in the open. They're still regarded as kind of extreme, which takes us to our next slide. Northern views on slavery, right? And that's not what that says. I skipped a slide. Okay. So most Northerners do not like slavery. Okay. There's not a lot of pro-slavery Northerners out there. They do exist. And those of you who read across 5 Aprils maybe didn't see a pro-slavery Northerner, but you definitely saw like a pro-Southern Northerner. They're few and far between. They do exist, and we'll talk about kind of the Civil War as its own beast a little bit. But before the Civil War, there are not a ton of Northerners who really glorify or enjoy the Southern economic system. But it's not a thing they think we need to go and get rid of, right? So, as it says on the slide, they might have told you it was immoral. They might have told you it was wrong. But very few people are going to say, okay, well, we need to go ahead and go down south or make federal laws to abolish slavery where it exists. You wouldn't have found a lot of Northerners who would be willing to say that, even if slavery maybe was icky, right? They're like, oh, slavery's icky. I don't like that. I don't do that. I wouldn't want it near me. But that's just the way things are done in the South. That's kind of how most of the Northerners would have thought about that. And abolitionists were seen as really extreme. Now, the reason that a lot of Northerners felt this way, there's a few. There's a moral argument to be made, right? They thought it was immoral. They thought it was wrong to still do this to somebody, but also not my problem. And many Northerners, just like Southerners, many white Northerners are also incredibly racist at this time, and they don't think it's not necessarily coming from a good place that they think that slavery shouldn't exist, but they don't want multiple races in America. Um, you also have an economic viewpoint to it, right? So if you introduce slavery into the North, which is a whole thing some people are afraid of, or just even, those low paying factory jobs that are the bread and butter for the um, newly arrived Irish and German immigrants, for example, well, those are going to be taken by slaves and former slaves who will work for less or work for nothing in the case of slaves. There are only a few experiments in trying to bring slavery to that kind of factory industry. If you're talking about moving out west, a lot of people who move out west, their view of the West is a whole massive land of family farms run by free people. It's not plantation agriculture like it in the South. And if they look at the South, they can see that most of the white folks in the South who are still farmers, they still have a very rural existence, and they can't afford to have very prosperous farms because all the best land is used for plantation agriculture. So your family farmer, which if you move to the West, that's probably what you wanted to do, um, can't really get ahead in the South, right? Which is another reason a lot of Southerners are willing to move out. So there are abolitionists, and abolitionists are going to grow. So abolitionists, I'm on the second one here, right? Abolitionists do want to get rid of slavery where it exists. Okay, they do want to make federal laws or whatever, any sort of thing they can to abolish slavery in the South. And they're going to grow more vocal. Now, even when we get to 1860, even when we get to the Civil War, most Northerners are not abolitionists. Most Northerners who sign up to fight, we'll talk about, are not doing it to free slaves. It evolves to gain more of that angle as the war goes on. We'll talk about it. But there are more and more abolitionists than there were before, right? As time marches on. And this serves as like a boogeyman, right? And so it's a boogeyman to the Southerners who are going to call all Northerners abolitionists, radicals, extremists. We still kind of do this today in politics, by the way. Whereas the Northern politicians and the Northerners kind of have to be like, oh, this guy's rocking the boat. I'm not here to rock the boat. I don't believe in all that stuff. I'm not an abolitionist. I just don't want slavery near me. Okay, so that's kind of the Northern view on slavery, not always how we sell it now. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so the Northern economy. Oh, good. We'll end on economy. The Northern economy. The Industrial Revolution was the process that turned the North from mainly agricultural to urban and industrial. For it to get over that halfway point, right? Over half of people living in cities and towns rather than a rural environment, or over half of people having a job other than farmer, that's going to take a long time. That's going to take a lot longer than even the scope of our class. But it's well underway. And if you look at a lot of the interests and the people who can influence politics and policy in the North in the 1830s, 40s, 50s, they are more and more urban, and they are going to have more and more of an industrial interest over an agricultural one. So the Industrial Revolution is in full swing. Okay, the process by which we don't have one person making all their stuff or people making whole goods from start to finish, but we have factories where we more efficiently make things, and we get big business out of that. So factories spring up all around the North. There's a whole lot of technological advances to be made. Things like interchangeable parts, for example, is a big one. So this is kind of weird, but when you don't make things in a factory, let's say I have a like a rifle in the military. If each one is kind of made from beginning to end by one person, if one part of the mechanism breaks, it's going to be really tough for me to fix it. There's a good chance I'm going to have to get a whole new one because I don't have this thing called interchangeable parts. Well, a guy named Eli Whitney, who's actually famous for a different thing, which we'll talk about, created the patented interchangeable parts, which now that we work in factories and each person only makes one part, and we have machines to help us out to do that. Well, now I could take this part from this old machine, rifle in this case, whatever it is, and I can put it on mine that's broken. And I know that sounds like a really small thing, but it changes a lot, believe it or not. Just in our daily lives, everything we use comes from somewhere, right? So, yeah, factories from the north, technological advances. And factories themselves, we talked about this with the doodle notes, are a new thing. The idea that we can get people together at one place of work and we are paying them for their time and they are doing the same menial tasks over and over rather than paying them for the amount of product they make, that's going to be new. Changes the way that people live. Okay. And again, these are pretty low paying menial jobs as far as the people doing most of the actual work. Excuse me. And they are staffed by people who recently moved in from the country and from people like the country, like rural environments. Those people who were farmers before, and all their children who don't have enough land to farm. And they're staffed by recent immigrants. All right, last slide today. So, Northern economy 2. Factories are going to increase efficiency because you can divide up smaller tasks. We talked about that, kind of the division of labor side of things. Textiles are usually the first thing that you industrialize. Making clothes, for whatever reason, is usually the first and easiest thing you can do. You can turn a profit. And even today, if you look at the countries where we get most of our clothing from, they are in the earlier stages. It's different now because technology is just more widespread in general, but they're in the earlier stages of this industrial revolution a little bit. It's going to look a lot different. Everyone's got a cell phone, right? But yeah, so other technological advances, I already talked about interchangeable parts, but things like the telegraph. This is the first era in history that you can instantly communicate. So if you need to get an order of something from a factory, it's going to be a lot quicker. Also, obviously, you can imagine revolutionizes politics and journalism, having the ability to get news instantly. If you don't know about telegraphs, it's kind of interesting. You have to learn a thing called Morse code. And basically, telegraph wires look just like telephone wires, which is even now a dated concept anyway, or power lines. They look like power lines. But you would just tap, 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 and it would go beep, 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 beep. And you had to be trained so you could listen to the beeps that it would send, and you would be on the other side writing things down. So to us, right, seems really old timey, seems really inefficient to us. When you can say, let's say I see something newsworthy, I just take out my phone and I record it and I press send and the whole world could know it. I know I don't have the followers. I get it. You don't need to roast me. But back then, that was the speed of light for them. Steam power is a big deal. Okay. Steam power means you can build factories in more places. Before this, any sort of factory or prototype factory, early things, had to be near a running water source to run their machines. It's a whole thing. I don't understand it too well, so I'm not going to try and explain it to you. But with steam power, you can put your factories wherever you want. With steam power, water travel is going to be a lot faster because you don't have to rely on the wind or human power to row. With steam power, you get to have locomotives and railroads, so you don't even have to worry about water, right? Rivers were the first highways of America. That's going to change for the first time. Maybe the second if you want to include the canal stuff. But now you can build a railroad wherever you need to. All right. So railroad mileage is often used as a measure of industrialization when you're talking about this time period, whether you're talking about the North in America or in Europe. They talk about it because a lot of those areas are industrializing at really uneven paces. But the North is going to be geographically smaller than the South, right? Square mileage, it's smaller, but it has double the mile of railroad tracks. So we'll talk about that when we get to the Civil War. It's a pretty big advantage, and I in a couple of the classes I already talked about it. So that is where we are. You should only be like here, okay? And I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but that's because I want you to have time to work on your trigger events too. Have a great day. I'll see you.